and I'm enjoying it very much. As you see by the photography, we had a lovely tour yesterday. So today I'm going to give two short talks with a little break in between. Is that correct? Okay. So the first one is the story of the discovery of Helicobacter, because everyone likes to hear that story, and if you heard my talk before, I'm very sorry, you have to hear it again, because that's history, and that never changes. So this reminds you where I come from, in Perth, Western Australia. It's located here, and of course it is quite a long flight, 30 hours, and the time zone in Australia is Greenwich plus 8, so Cartagena plus 14, so quite a difficult problem with jet lag, but I'm enjoying it very much at this stage. I've been here already for 1 week. Perth is similar size to Cartagena, Bogota. I think it's 2 million people, so it's a good, very, very nice city. And I come from the University of Western Australia in Perth, and here's a picture of the campus, a beautiful campus. This is one of the top universities in Australia. So in Australia, university is subsidised by the government. So the top universities are all usually government universities, not private. And currently we're in this range, Jiaotong Shanghai rating 88 to 96. That puts Western Australia, University of Western Australia in the top 100 universities. Here's a picture of my colleague, Dr. Robin Warren, and I sitting there at the University of Western Australia. And as Fabian said, it's now 10 years plus since the discovery was awarded the Nobel Prize. And of course, the Nobel Prizes are announced in October, so maybe 3 weeks from now, we'll see the new Nobel Prizes for 2016. It's very interesting that probably Alfred Nobel had Helicobacter. And this is, if you read Alfred Nobel's biography, it's like everybody, 100 years ago, everybody probably had Helicobacter, especially in Europe. And so many famous people had chronic, lifelong indigestion, dyspepsia. So here's a biography of Alfred Nobel. It says, during most of his life he suffered from poor health. He complained of indigestion, headaches, and occasional spells of depression. So your patients with Helicobacter will sometimes tell you about these things, and headache is one of the possible side effects of Helicobacter infection. And everybody said he's simply overworked or he's under serious mental stress. So it used to be when the doctor didn't know what's wrong with the patient, he would always say to the patient, too much stress, especially women, and because the women don't make so much acid, they didn't have ulcers, they just had chronic dyspepsia, too much stress. So just remember, whenever the doctor tells you something is caused by stress, you know the truth is he doesn't really know. He thinks it's probably not serious, but doesn't know. So this was a very good lesson for doctors, and as it can be applied to so many other diseases. So previously everything's caused by stress, but the 21st century we know, we have the new technologies, we want to see evidence base. And if something is not, if somebody tells you it's caused by stress, you say this is a big opportunity for research. We can find out the real cause. And then we can win the Nobel Prize for something else. So just remember that. Now this is Dr. Warren's image. So it's important that you understand this is very unique. There's no other place in the human body where you see homogeneous culture of bacteria growing straight on the epithelial cells. So usually in the colon or in the small intestine, everywhere, there is a layer of mucus, and the bacteria are up above on the mucus. Even if you take a rectal biopsy or colon biopsy, you see the mucus is clear, it doesn't have bacteria in it. The bacteria are actually in the lumen. So it's very unusual to see a colonization of the mucosa like that, except Helicobacter. And there are so many bacteria in the stomach. So this translates in 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 10 living organisms. So it's a very strong infection, and you can see how these bacteria would affect the immune system and have other effects on the body because of that. Also, with another bacteria, so if you had a Staph aureus look like this, you would be very unwell. You might be septicemic. But with Helicobacter, it's able to control the immune system so that it stays in the stomach, it lives like this for your whole life, 50 years, 70 years, 90 years. And so it's a very unique chronic infection, and we can maybe discuss this in question time. In 1984, when I started, well, this was our first publication, 1984, and Dr. Warren and I started work together in 1981. And you see, in those days I was very poor. Salaries are quite low, and so I just have to get these trousers at TJ Maxx, that kind of place, Kmart, poorly fitting. But now, luckily, I can, after Nobel Prize, I can go to the tailor, have good trousers. That's my friend Dr. Warren. At this stage, let's think about this. It was difficult to accept this new discovery. So why is there so much resistance to new ideas in medicine and science? And the person who knows this is Daniel Boorstin, librarian for the US Congress and a historian. He says the greatest obstacle to knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. So people already knew. They say we don't need to know the cause of ulcers, we don't need any new ones. We already know the cause. It's caused by stress and a few other things. So just remember that if someone says, I already know the answer, he's not looking for the new technology or the new discovery, and that causes a blockage. And so that is why it's an advantage for the young scientists, the young doctors, the medical students, the PhDs just starting up. They don't have all that other knowledge. And so they're looking just for the new stuff and the evidence base. And so they will make the discoveries and be making an observation which are older physicians like us probably not thinking so much about. Peptic ulcers, in Australia, I have to show this picture to the medical students. Sometimes they never saw a peptic ulcer. They could go to endoscopy every day for more than a week and they didn't see one ulcer. And so we have to show them and remind them the duodenal and gastric ulcers. Now this is old data, 1988 from CDC, and the annual healthcare costs of ulcer disease estimated in the US, 6 billion. In China today, where Helicobacter is 50% of the population, they think at least 6 billion. And probably some proportion of that would be present in most countries in South America because of peptic ulcer disease, gastritis, and stomach cancer. But we have these different costs here, but this is an important one because uncontrolled peptic ulcer is a very serious disease. Decreased productivity and days lost from work. The person with severe ulcer disease cannot reach their potential. And this is especially bad if you have the president. You know, George Bush, he used to have a duodenal ulcer. And quite a few politicians would retire early because they thought the stress, the difficult job, was making their ulcer worse. And so they would not fulfill their potential. Nowadays, we don't have to worry about that anymore, and people can take treatment for H. pylori and keep working, no problem. Now, in those days, originally, you remember, this is big competition between SmithKline, and they were the makers of Tagamet, and they were having a big battle with the makers of Zantac. And Zantac was Glaxo. So now they're all joined up. But in those days, it was a big competition in the 80s. And they said Tagamet is the pale green pill that cures ulcers. So this is a financial magazine. I think this is from Fortune magazine in 1982. So this is not true. They said it's a pale green pill which cures ulcers, but in fact, it didn't cure ulcers. It was just a permanent treatment. So patients, of course, always taking the treatment. They could never stop. Each time they stopped taking the H2 blockers, the relapse would occur sooner. And this is the problem we've recognized now with pharmaceutical companies. They depend on treatment. They like treatment supporting themselves, hypertension, diabetes, statins, new biologics, infliximabs, treatments for Crohn's disease, arthritis, things like that. The value of a cure is very low because it can only be used once. So pharmaceutical companies are not interested in a cure for H. pylori. And really, they're not very interested in a cure for hypertension or cholesterol or diabetes because they don't make any money if you just sell one. Then you're cured. So it must be somebody else has to do that kind of research, and that's university-based research. So breakthroughs depend on academic research. It has a long lead time, open-ended budgets, curiosity-driven, no particular goal, investigation of fundamental processes. So that is the sort of research that we have to fund, and maybe it's someone says, oh, it's a waste of money, you didn't make any discoveries, but you don't know where that new discovery can come from. And the example from Perth and my research in Western Australia just shows you don't have to be in the US always. A lot of discoveries made in the US, but people in other countries with not so many resources can also make important discoveries. There's been so many unique things in Colombia that I'm sure, you know, all kinds of discoveries in infectious disease especially can be made here. So I'm very optimistic about the success. So here's Dr. Warren and me in 1984, and established gastroenterologists found it hard to accept the teachings of the two Australians because we're very junior researchers and we're trying to tell the professor and the international experts that it should be Helicobacter treatment. And not only were the investigators completely unknown, they also seemed to be supremely confident that the hypothesis was correct. So people say, Dr. Marshall, how come you're so certain that these bacteria can be causing such a problem? And I said, well, they have been discovered before. They had been seen before for more than 100 years. And here's Giulio Bizzotto, Turin, 1892. He's an Italian. He said acid-tolerant spirochetes live in the dog's stomach. So we now know that dogs and cats have other kinds of Helicobacter. And humans can sometimes catch Helicobacter from the animals. So this is a picture of Bizzotto's thesis. And here you see a parietal cell. And these bacteria, gram-negative spirochetes inside the parietal cell. So he said the bacteria must be acid tolerant, or else they turn off acid secretion, or both. And so we know this can happen now with Helicobacter, and sometimes you'll see under electron microscopy, you can see H. pylori in the parietal cells. In patients who have corpus gastritis, the acid secretion can go down, and people can have achlorhydria, which is a big risk factor for stomach cancer. In these years, between 1978 and 1982, I know many of us will remember Professor Xiao Shudong. He only died last month. But he was working with Dr. Yao Shi, and he saw Helicobacter. You see the Helicobacter there in his scanning electron microscopy of the gastric mucosa in China in 1982. But of course, nobody's very interested in those days. So Dr. Warren and I, this is some data from our first study in 1982, and some interesting lessons here. You see, here we have endoscopic appearance, the total number with bacteria, and the p-value. So I was getting the biopsies, I was sending to the lab, and then Dr. Warren, he's doing a blinded observation of the histology. We also did culture, things like that. And here you see in those days in Australia, total 100 patients, 58%, 58 patients, 58% infected with Helicobacter. Nowadays in Australia it's much lower because those patients nearly all been treated. But here you see the patients with duodenal ulcer, 13 patients, 100% infected with Helicobacter. So this is what we expect these days. And the p-value highly significant. And gastric ulcer, remember, gastric ulcer is not always Helicobacter. It's a proportion with NSAID, aspirin, ibuprofen mostly, and those people don't have Helicobacter, but the p-value is still highly significant. Now, if you're a gastroenterologist, you'll notice something else here. You see esophagus. So this is GERD, esophagitis, it's 34 patients. Only 14 patients out of 34 had Helicobacter, 41%. And in those days, I'm not a very good statistician, so I just ignored that. I couldn't understand that, so I didn't say anything. But we now know there's a negative correlation with Helicobacter. And so when you see this p-value 0.996, you say, it's too big, it's not significant. But of course, it is significant on the other side of the distribution. On a two-tailed test, we would say that is significant. So this means that there's a negative association between Helicobacter and GERD. So this is one of the controversies. Should people with GERD, maybe you leave the Helicobacter alone? Now, I don't agree with that, but some people say Helicobacter can keep the acid down a little bit, so maybe it can be beneficial for the esophagus. And so that was one of the things we saw in this paper. So in those days already, the drug business is $5 billion, H2 blockers. And in our study we have 13 patients. Would the world accept the new cause of ulcers on the basis of data from only 13 patients? And we would say yes, but of course, no way. It's not going to happen. So at that point, you have to do a lot of work, and people have to confirm the data in other countries and do prospective studies, all those things. So that was the beginning of a long, hard 10 years of hard work. And one of the stories is, how did we culture the bacteria? Easter Thursday 1982. And in Australia, we have a lot of holidays over Easter. Like any kind of Catholic country or Christian country, have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And then, so we cultured the bacteria here, and then we had been unable to grow the bacteria, but we put this bacteria on the Petri dish. On Saturday, the technician, the microbiology technician, he was very, very busy. So he says, I'm not going to look at Dr. Marshall's biopsies. They're always negative. It's a waste of time. So he didn't look at them on Saturday. And so 3 more days went by until finally on Tuesday, on day 5, they saw the first culture of Helicobacter. And so that's one of the things, if you're trying to do something difficult, keep trying, and maybe you have a little lucky event, a little lucky break. And this often happens in science. So now we knew that it took 5 days to culture H. pylori, and now every research lab can culture. It's a little bit difficult, but not too bad. And so Dr. Warren and I, we tried to publish this paper, and we submitted that paper, an abstract about our discovery, to the Gastro Society in Australia. And they wrote me this letter to say, Dr. Marshall, I regret your research paper was not accepted for presentation. The abstracts continued to increase. For this meeting, 67 were submitted. We could only accept 56. So our paper was one of the worst ones. And they said, it's so bad, Dr. Marshall, you can't even have a poster. It's too crazy. And so I say to you, we all submit papers and we often get rejection letters. Always keep that rejection letter. And if you come to my office, I have it in a frame, the original rejection letter, and we can take a photo together and remember that. Always keep your rejection letter in an envelope in your bedroom drawer, but you don't look at it very often. It makes you too sad. But one day, when you're older, maybe you'll turn out to be correct and you can put your rejection letter in a frame. So when you get a rejection letter from a US journal, often extremely insulting, and you say, this is a good one, I'll keep this one. And one day, some reviewer could be very embarrassed. I think I've somehow got a... So finally, everybody said, which comes first, chicken or the egg? Does the bacteria cause the ulcers, or do people with an ulcer get the bacteria? And so we have to fulfill Koch's postulates. And he said for tuberculosis, you infect a guinea pig, and if you can culture the bacteria out of the guinea pig lesion, then the bacteria are harmful. So this was his teaching to us, Koch's postulates. So we had to fulfill Koch's postulates, and we could not find an animal model. Nowadays we use the Mongolian gerbil. It was discovered by Watanabe, I think, in Japan. We can do that. But in those days we had no animal model, so I needed to take the experiment myself. And this is a comic made by the Abbott company, because Abbott made clarithromycin. And they published this comic about the experiment, and my lab tech, he says, "Dr. Marshall, you're crazy." I'm saying, well, there's no other way. We have to do the experiment. And so I had a biopsy. I'm negative for Helicobacter, and then one day I drank the Helicobacter from 2 Petri dishes. After a few days, I didn't feel so well. I started feeling nausea. And my mother said I had halitosis. So, when you see a patient, when you see somebody with halitosis, you think, maybe you just need to have some Helicobacter treatment, antibiotics, we could cure you. So that's a good thing to know. Now here's Dr. Warren. He says, "Dr. Marshall, your stomach lining is dangerously inflamed." He's looking at the fibre optic endoscope, old one here. And so on day 8, I had a strong infection with Helicobacter. Here you see, and as you see, these epithelial cells are quite abnormal with the Helicobacter there. And we published that in the Medical Journal of Australia. And so we said Helicobacter can infect a healthy person. It's the cause of gastritis, a disease affecting more than half of all humans. So we were very surprised then to find out it was so common. So in my last 3 or 4 slides was just ask this question: why did we discover Helicobacter at that time? And so here's this thing about new technology. Old technology is here. This is a barium meal, benign gastric and duodenal ulcers, so we can see that. You know, we can do lots of x-rays. There must be a better way. Let's do endoscopy. Okay, so here you see the old technology. So we've got new technology, unexpected new uses. So the old technology, barium, old use, see ulcers. New technology, fibre optic endoscopy. We're just doing the same thing with the new technology, old use, see ulcers better. Now, much better. But we're not doing anything new. And so the new use, we've got new technology. What else can we do with it? Take a biopsy, study the microbiology, the physiology, chemistry, electrophysiology, and nowadays genomics, proteomics, microbiomes, all that kind of stuff, because we've got means of sampling the stomach. So the lesson is, when there's a new technology for one thing, probably you can use it for lots of other things and solve a lot of other problems. So that's why I'm so excited about the new technology. That's the end of my talk for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Marshall.